Friends, glad to welcome you. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will break down the situation in Ukraine as of September 17, 2025. Many interesting events took place over the day, so let's get straight to it. We'll start with Ukraine and the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the armed forces of the Russian Federation, namely the Dnepr and Vosto groupings, continue their offensive. Important news has come in from both the western and eastern flanks today. First, let's focus on the area of responsibility of the Dnepr grouping. Objective control footage has appeared directly from the settlement of Primorsko. We see a series of episodes showing how operators of Russian FPV drones are literally wiping this part of the town off the map. The main strikes are hitting Ukrainian strongpoints, forcing them to fall back further toward the position located on the border between Stepnogorsk and Primorsko. All of this indicates that the Russian army is currently advancing in this direction. If control is consolidated over these territories, the fighting for Stepnogorsk can be considered finished, at least practically finished. I remind you that just yesterday we reviewed video showing Russian aviation striking the bridge along the M18 highway that connects Stepnogorsk with Zaporizhzhia and the rest of the territory. From that footage, it is still unclear whether the bridge was completely destroyed, but it was definitely damaged, which means logistics there are seriously complicated. And as we see, as soon as the bridge was hit and Ukrainian supply lines were disrupted, the Russian army immediately went on the offensive. We should expect further confirmations and clarifications from this sector in the near future. Now let's move to the eastern part of the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Vostok grouping, comprising the 36th, 29th and 5th armies, is advancing. The push is being carried out along a broad front of roughly 30 kilometers. As we can see, today there were again adjustments to the front line in favor of Russian forces. The situation here is very notable, and the fact that I single out 3 armies is particularly important. Let's recall how events developed from September 3, 2025, when the Vostok grouping launched its active offensive. Between September 3–4, Russian forces completely cleared Novosyolovka, after which the front was effectively broken. Looking at the situation more broadly, several key points stand out. From the beginning of September, the main shifts occurred on the northern envelopment along the Volchia River. That's where the advance developed. The 36th and 29th armies were operating in that zone primarily. Only around September 12th did the 5th Army enter the offensive, advancing from the southern flank toward Uspanovka, Poltavka and Okhotnichye. Around September 14th, the 5th Army entered the fighting for a network of strongpoints located south of Novoivanovka. This fortified area between Uspanovka, Novopol and Timirovka is one of the most powerful defensive belts established since 2014. There are numerous fortifications, positions and trenches. It should be noted, however, that by that time Ukrainian units had already been heavily worn down by fighting with the 36th and 29th. Armies suffered significant losses and were depleted of resources. From September 15th, the advance on the northern envelopment began to slow. The fighting turned positional in the areas of Beryozovoy and Kalinovskoye. This is explained by Ukrainian reinforcements being moved in. Siversk is concentrating on the Zaporizhzhia direction all the forces he can muster. On September 15–16, the first reports came in of evacuations of several villages in the Pokrovsk area, where Ukrainian troops are being rushed in. The aim of these actions is clear: to try to halt the advance of the 36th and 29th armies on the northern flank. Nonetheless, the 5th Army continued its offensive, tasked with clearing the fortified lines south of Novoivanovka. By September 16th, there were confirmations of its presence on the southeastern outskirts of the settlement. Maps began to mark new breakthrough lines, and today, September 17th, sensational information arrived. Russian forces have reportedly taken, practically without resistance or fighting, one of the strongest nodes of Ukrainian defense on the Uspanovka-Huliaipol axis. This was confirmed not only by pro-Russian, but also by Ukrainian cartographers, including the deep state team. By midday, it became clear that the Ukrainian defense there had effectively collapsed, and a sector that under other circumstances might have required months of fighting fell in just 2 and 3 days. By evening, videos appeared showing Ukrainian FPV drones striking their own former positions, confirming the loss of control. Geolocation indicated these were exactly those fortifications. The strongpoint complex is impressive in size, roughly 3.5 kilometers wide and about a kilometer deep. That entire area came under Russian control in a matter of days. This is a serious success that opens the way for further advances toward Uspinovka, which is already being struck by Russian bombers. Today, footage was published of FAB strikes on the southern and central parts, including the supply road used by Ukrainian forces. Russian troops can now begin assaults on Poltavka and Okhotnichye, which are already in a semi-encircled state. If these settlements are lost, the Ukrainian side will find itself in a difficult situation. After that, the offensive will move to Uspinovka, and its loss would begin a semi-encirclement of Huliaipol and bring Russian forces onto the R85 highway. The pace of the advance here is so high that there are grounds to believe the picture on this axis could change radically by the end of 2025. Now let's move to the Pokrovsk sector of the front, starting with the city itself. Pro-Russian sources report that Russian forces have begun a third attempt to storm Pokrovsk. Similar attempts using reconnaissance sabotage groups were made over the summer and into early autumn. The first two attempts were not successful. Russian forces were forced to withdraw back towards Zverov, Troyanda, and other areas. The third attempt is now underway. Its objectives are, on the one hand, to expand control in the southern and central parts of the city, and on the other, to divert Ukrainian resources from the fighting in the Shakov pocket. According to the latest reports, Russian units are clearing the Pokrovsk perimeter around the central cemetery and attempting to encircle the Ukrainian grouping in the area of the Olympiet Stadium, as well as to cut off the Lazurny neighborhood. How the situation will develop remains to be seen. This attempt may be more successful than the two previous ones. In any case, the attack is important for Russian forces, especially given that the situation on the northeastern outskirts of the Pokrovsk agglomeration is not going very well for them. Neutral cartographers report that Ukrainian forces, after clearing Pankivka, moved further west and are now attempting to outflank Mayak and the strongpoint there from the north and northwest. Just yesterday, pro-Ukrainian sources reported that Pankivka itself had been fully cleared. Today, information arrived about an advance to the west. As we can see, the Ukrainian side's primary objective is to sever the breakthrough in the second line of Ukraine's defenses by a smaller radius, the so-called small circle. That is, they plan to advance along the line Dorozhny-Ivanivka-Pankivka and then eastward. Along this axis, they are attempting to cut the corridor so as to isolate this pocket from the main territory, encircle it and take it into a kind of cauldron. Let me remind you that in the past few days, Ukrainian forces have attempted to advance from Vladimirovka toward Novotoretskoye, aiming to cut off a wider salient and encircle a significantly larger number of Russian units. However, yesterday reports emerged that the Russian General Staff had redeployed the 8th Army to this sector, tasked with stabilizing the situation around Novotoretskoye. This, in turn, allows the 51st Army to continue moving forward and strengthen its presence in the bay areas of Rodinskoye, Belitskoye, Dobropolye, Shakovo, and other settlements. We will see how events unfold next, but it is clear that the intensification of fighting in Pokrovsk, the start of assault operations around Uspinovka, and the need for the Ukrainian forces to allocate troops and reserves there could lead to a phase of positional warfare in this sector. It turns out that Siversky's rescue group may, in reality, fail to accomplish its assigned objectives. This, in turn, will lead to new waves of Russian offensives, aimed at the final encirclement of the northern sector, including the settlements of Rodinsko and Belitsko, access to the outskirts of Dobropolye, and the full encirclement of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. Now let's move to the Kostiantynivka sector. Today, several important geolocations from the southeastern outskirts of the city have appeared. As we can see, the map has undergone further changes, and all adjustments were made based on footage released by the Ukrainian side. In this footage, an FPV drone strike by the Ukrainian 5th Brigade on Russian positions was recorded. The strike targeted a strongpoint, suggesting that this position has likely fallen under Russian control. Several additional strikes were carried out on a nearby dacha complex in the southeastern part of Kostiantynivka. These materials indicate that the eastern districts of the city are either already under Russian control, are in the process of being cleared, or, if still held by Ukrainian forces, no longer retain their former significance or cohesion. In any case, the clearing operation is nearing completion, and Russian forces are gradually leveling the front line. However, apparently, there are not yet enough conditions to begin a decisive advance toward the Klebanbik reservoir. Next, we move to the Siversk direction, from where a large amount of geolocation data has again been received. The Russian army is also advancing actively here, and, as in previous days, the main battles are taking place around the Severesk forestry area and the settlements of Yampol and Dronovka. According to the latest reports, the Liman-Siversk road, passing through Yampol and Dronovka, has already been cut, and Russian forces are physically present in this area. As a result, Siversk has lost supply lines from Lyman, the defensive framework is disrupted, and resupply is now being conducted via southern roads through Sloviansk. Logistics are thus seriously hindered. Reports indicate heavy fighting in Yampol. Today, positions near the ostrich farm were withdrawn to a grey zone. According to pro-Western and neutral cartographers, by evening, Ukrainian forces carried out a counter-strike, returning the farm to the grey zone. Fighting here is intense because the outcome determines the integrity of the entire Liman-Siversk defensive line. The loss of Yampol would automatically mean the eventual loss of Siversk within the coming months. Regarding map updates, some analysts have already marked the Severesk forestry area in favor of Russian forces. Reports also indicate the beginning of preparations for an offensive toward Dronovka. The situation is developing rapidly, and in the meantime, Russian forces are methodically destroying Siversk, turning it into ruins in preparation for urban combat and the entry of assault units. Now let's look at the situation near Kupiansk. Today, pro-Ukrainian cartographers from the Deep State team confirmed a breakthrough and collapse of the front line on the northern and northwestern outskirts of the city. Russian forces are advancing steadily, and notably, these cartographers update their maps daily. It seems that their updates do not reflect immediate advancements, but rather catch up with already established realities. This rush is likely related to the possibility that Ukrainian forces are preparing to withdraw from Kupiansk, and map updates are needed to maintain credibility and show current developments. We will monitor how events unfold further. There are currently few direct geolocation confirmations of advancement, but the trend is clear. It should also be noted that the situation in the northeastern part of Kharkiv Oblast is becoming increasingly interesting. Despite receiving little attention, an offensive is underway here as well, and it seems likely that in the near future we will witness a repeat of the scenario previously observed in Zaporizhzhia, where the Russian East grouping advanced almost without resistance. Initially, the offensive progressed near Pokrovsk, then Ukrainian reserves were deployed, and the front line stalled. After that, activity increased in the Zaporizhzhia sector. Now there are reports of new Ukrainian units being redeployed. It is possible that the advance will slow here as well, especially after fighting near Poltavka, Okhotnichi, and Uspenovka. However, until reserves arrive, the Russian army appears determined to exploit the moment and push forward. Today, there is information about a possible unification of two bridgeheads along the Oskol River in the Melove and Katne area. In this scenario, settlements such as Balogivka, Dvoroshenske, and Otradne would come under Russian control. This indicates that while Ukrainian forces are focused on Pokrovsk and Zaporizhzhia, Russia is attempting to make active progress here, taking advantage of the enemy's lack of reserves. This forms the current logic of combat operations. The Russian army attacks where there is no resistance and halts where it encounters reserves. Ukraine is forced to constantly chase, redeploy forces, playing a never-ending game of catch-up. And now, this game is increasingly working in favor of Russian forces. That's all for now, friends. Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and see you next time.